Yeah, good evening, everybody in India, and good morning, Dr. Donald Martin and Miss Debbie. Uh, Welcome to this webinar on to the competitive applicant for the undergraduate study. Last year, around similar time, we had a lot of sessions. We had taken a lot of different options, different topics onto the undergraduate study, which in India, we say the bachelor's education. So after the 12th standard, when we enter into the bachelor's part of it, the United States is one of the countries which offer a very highly quality education, the multidisciplinary education. And as I always say, that it is very, very um, uh, really quality conscious and industry specific study which you get into that, and teachers makes the most in any university, and you will find a large amount of Nobel Prize winners sitting into the university, major research happening into university. So with this, let me introduce Dr. Donald Martin, who was the former Dean of Admissions and Dean of Students at the Columbia University and University of Chicago. You may be knowing the Columbia is the Ivy League university, one of the most prestigious university. And he was handling the admissions part of it, receiving the applications from the students, evaluating the students, providing the admissions, providing the scholarship opportunity. And in the University of Chicago, which is another premier university, Booth School of Business, which is one of the very, very prestigious business schools, and now the US news ranking, it is a number one in the United States. Northwestern University, Wheaton College. So over a period of around 28 years, he was evaluating at different universities, and more than 125,000 applications he himself evaluated, gone through the complete details. So he knows in and out of the American education system. He knows what are the criteria universities will take into the admissions part of it. Today, we are going to talk about lot of things, not what is easily available onto the internet or any of the university website, but his own experiences for so many years. And after 28 years, he has been working with the students over 50 countries. He is also columnist at US News and World Report magazine. And he's been going to different colleges, different continents, and taking sessions with the student, one of the very, very celebrity academicians in the United States. So I welcome Dr. Donald Martin to this, and he will be taking, along with him, Miss Debbie will be taking some part of the session, and she is an expert into undergraduate admissions. We had last year launched a mentoring program. So Dr. Donald Martin and Miss Debbie both are really working on to the mentoring program, where we groom the students from 9th standard itself for the university requirements. So we provide them academic and non-academic guidance to them. What is this? They should be doing it. And she will be taking, she is a big asset and she loves to interact with the student. And she herself is the very accomplished counselor. So with this, I hand over to Dr. Donald Martin. He can start with today's session.
Dr. Dioris, thank you ever so much. It is such a pleasure to be with all of you again this year for this webinar series. And something Dr. Dioris didn't mention, but I'm going to mention, is that it has been my pleasure, and now Debbie's as well, to work with Astute. I started working with Tushar over 12 years ago. And interestingly enough, the way that we met was through a webinar just like this. And after the webinar was concluded, Tushar reached out to me, and we have been collaborating, and the scope of work we have done has grown since that time. I actually visited India earlier this year on a speaking tour, and hopefully I'll be getting to go back in the not too distant future, perhaps in December, for some more visits. So any of you listening today, perhaps I'll get a chance to meet you in person. Let me also welcome our students and perhaps parents who may be joining us this evening. We are delighted to have you here. And as Dr. Dioris said, Debbie is you're going to see her go off the screen here in just a second. But before she goes, I'm just going to say that she will be back because she's actually going to partner with me and present one of the sections of the webinar. So Debbie, welcome to you. And we will give you a break from the screen now, and we'll see you in a little bit. Okay?
Thank you, Dr. Don. I'll see you shortly.
All right, great. Now, what are we going to cover today in our webinar? We're going to cover some very, very important information, which, as Dr. Dioris mentioned, is not always commonly known in the general public. Some of these things don't get communicated on an admissions website, let's say, or in an admissions information session. These are things that go on, some of them behind the scenes, but they can make a huge difference in the success or non-success, shall we say, of an application. So we're going to focus on that today. And I just want to say again, before going into the actual agenda, it has been amazing to me working with students from India over these past several years. The dedication they show, the commitment, the motivation they express as they go through this application process, willing to move almost halfway around the world to another culture, another continent, and engage in academic study and become part of an academic community is highly commendable. I've also been absolutely astounded with the level of support that you students receive from your parents. It's wonderful. And I just think I wish every country would emulate what happens in India in this regard. Lastly, before I go through the agenda, as we do go through, there could be some questions that may come up in your minds as you hear what Debbie or I have to share. If that is the case, I believe there's a place here on this platform, a chat room, where you can put your questions in. And at the end, we'll take as many as we can. Dr. Dioris usually asks the questions, and then Debbie or I will respond. He may actually have some responses as well. That's truly my favorite part of any webinar that I do. I love answering questions. There are no bad questions at all. So if you have a question, please write it down in that chat box option as we go through, and we will come to those questions that you may have at the end. Now, let's get started. We're going to cover a few short facts just to give you a little bit of context about the undergraduate education program in the United States. Then I'm going to take a few moments to talk about what is the biggest mistake prospective students make. This happens every year and in every country around the globe, every time. And I want to share this because it's a huge mistake that you could make. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about how applying as an international student is similar to what a student in the United States would be going through, and then how it is different. There are similarities and differences. We're going to cover those. Then Debbie's going to jump back on camera with me, and she's going to share with you 4 common mistakes that applicants might make, that international applicants could make. She will share that. I'll come back and close out our session. I'll be talking about working with Astute, with Ms. Deborah, Ms. Debbie. We call her either name very affectionately, and myself in the coming months. We hope to have the privilege of working with some of you. If I might brag a little bit here, the students we worked with last year, the undergraduate applicants in our undergraduate mentoring program, every one of them was admitted to one or more of their universities with scholarships. So it was a very successful undertaking, and we'd love to have that opportunity to work with you as well. All right, let's move into the first fact. 30 years ago, only half of high school seniors apply to college in the USA. Today, that has gone up. It's now 2/3. So what does that mean? Thousands more every year are applying to institutions that have the same enrollment numbers. The institutions are not raising their enrollments by 2/3. No, not at all. They're holding their enrollments, but the number of applications has gone up. So what does that mean? Obviously, a bit more competition. The source here, college admission strategies. Debbie actually found this. I thought this was fascinating. In 1990, to give you an example, the acceptance percentage at the University of Pennsylvania, which is another fairly well-known institution in the United States, and along with what Dr. Dioris mentioned to you, it is one of the Ivy League schools. Their acceptance rate was 41%. In other words, they admitted 41% of those that applied each year. According to U.S. News and World Report and what Debbie found, this last year, their acceptance percentage was only 6%. See how that has dropped? As the numbers have gone up, the acceptance percentage goes down. One more fact. During the Trump administration, our former president, nearly 40% of colleges reported a loss in applications from international students. However, according to the New York Times, starting in the year 2021, with the new administration that has come in to the United States, that trend is going back. And the number of applications are starting to go up. Many institutions are having huge increases in student applications from individuals who hold citizenship in India, Asia, Europe, Latin America, Australia, wherever it may be. Okay, now, one last fact. I'm sorry. More than 80% of colleges and universities will be test optional starting in the fall of 2024. This number keeps going up. Less and less institutions are requiring that you submit an SAT or ACT score. But as Ms. Debbie is going to point out when she speaks with you about her part of this presentation, you still may very much want to consider taking the SAT and doing as well as you can. Ms. Debbie will mention why that might be so important. But it is for application purposes, to be evaluated as an applicant. Less and less colleges and universities are expecting or requiring that you submit the SAT for the evaluation for admission. Okay. And concern about the validity of these scores has also continued to increase. I actually believe within the next 20 to 25 years, we may see test scores go away entirely. They may no longer be required. The reason has been that not everyone does as well on tests as others do. And there's been a concern that this could be a prohibitive aspect of an application for someone who otherwise would be an outstanding student. So this continues to be discussed, and we'll see where this ends up. But for right now, as Ms. Debbie will share, we will want you to still consider submitting an SAT score when you apply. Okay, now, if I were to ask you today, if you just thought about this for a moment, what do you think is the biggest mistake prospective undergraduate college students make? In fact, this is true of prospective graduate students as well, any student. What is the biggest mistake they make? Well, I'm going to share with you what that is. It is not doing adequate research before you apply. There seems to be a myth. It's not true, in my opinion, but there is a sense out there in the US and abroad that there are only 10 universities in the United States that might be worth your time as an undergraduate student. Only 10. And you could probably name them. We know those names. They are talked about over and over and over again. And please don't hear me saying that they are not good institutions. Of course they are. But did you know that there are between 3,000 and 4,000? Did you hear that? Between 3,000 and 4,000 accredited institutions in the United States. It doesn't make logical sense that there are only 10 that you should consider. Ms. Debbie will share more about this, but what you want to do is make sure when you are getting started with, whether you're in the 9th standard, 10th standard, 11th standard, you want to absolutely be certain that you broaden your research. If you happen to get the privilege of working with Dr. Dioris and his team, with Ms. Debbie and me, through your undergrad application experience, you're going to be strongly encouraged to consider several options. Don't just start out with 3 or 4. You should start out with 15 or 20, and then you can narrow that down to the number of schools to which you believe you will apply. But you don't start out with just that small number. Remember now, this is about finding the best match. I probably should have added here, for who? For you. You're the only one that's going to do this. Not your teachers, not your friends, not your family. You're going to be the student. And you should be very involved in determining where you would like to study. Should you study whether you stay in India or whether you come to the United States? As I said, start out with a large number of options. Create a spreadsheet. Put these options, I suggest you put them on there in alphabetical order. Do not rank them yet. Your rank order of your options comes after you've done all of your research, not beforehand. You don't start out ranking all of these institutions. You wait until you've gotten all, and there could be several things. What is most important to you? Is it the size of the student body? Is it the location of the institution? Is it the class size you will be in your major? Is it the way in which the curriculum is taught? Is it the specific courses you would be exposed to? Is it the faculty members? On and on. Is it the campus itself? These are all critical. They're all important. But many times students only think about a ranking. That's all they think about. And that's, in my opinion, very short-sighted. So again, find out what you can. Do a website, check their website, do an internet search. One great idea, if you really want to get the scoop on an institution, on your internet browser, type in XYZ University in the news or recent happenings at XYZ University. You might be surprised at what you would find. It could influence your choice. So make sure you do these things, but remember, please, that first point at the top, this is about finding the best match. There's other things you're going to be needing to do here, but you need to do adequate research and do these things well ahead of time. You don't wait until 2 months before you're going to apply before you do all these things. If you do, you're going to lose out because you need more time to do adequate research, to start working on your essay, to create your list of recommenders, to know what your application deadlines are. All of these things are very important. So please, please, please do your research ahead of time. Now, how do international applicants and U.S. applicants, shall we say, how is this a similar application process between U.S. citizens, shall we say, and international students? Well, first of all, in most cases, applicants end up applying to around 8 to 9 on average undergraduate institutions. There's no rule about that. There's no requirement, but that's about the number that most will apply to. So that's similar whether you live in India or whether you live in the United States. Another, wait a minute here. There we go. Another area that would be similar is that you want to try to apply earlier than later. Now, I will explain what I mean here in just a moment. You want to apply so that there's enough time to evaluate your application, and also, most importantly, if you get admitted, you want to be sure you have enough time to gain your visa, which I'll talk about in this next section about something that's a little different for international students than United States citizens. The other reason you want to try and apply a little earlier is you'll just find out sooner. And if you're applying to several options, you have more time to think about them and do some research, a little more research on them before you make your decision. Now, one caveat here, one piece of information, one warning. Don't sacrifice the quality of your application for the speed with which you're trying to submit it. You don't have to have it in the very first day that applications open. That's not true. But you certainly don't want to wait till the last day. You want to apply earlier rather than later, but always with the focus on making sure you have the best application you can. Okay, next item on our list. Using the common application, whether you live in the United States, whether you live in India, anywhere in the world, if you're applying to the United States for undergraduate study, you will use the common application. And Astute, Ms. Debbie and I are very familiar with that particular part of things. We can absolutely help you to navigate that. So that's another similarity. And next, you will submit the same kinds of information on your application as anyone else. There will be the transcripts, the personal information, essays, letter. All of this is the same. There's no difference, but you're not asked to submit something other than these things because you're from another country. They will be the same. Okay, now what's different? Let's talk about what's different for a minute. Well, many institutions will require that you submit not only, well, they're making the SAT optional, but let's say the SAT is optional. They still may require you to demonstrate proficiency in the English language, which means they will most likely require either a TOEFL or an IELTS test. Some students in India have questioned this because you are very proficient in speaking English. But my response is, if the institution requires it, then go ahead and take it, because your score will be very good because you already speak English so well. It will further confirm your ability to speak and write and communicate in English. So don't be worried if you're asked to take it. That doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with you by any means. This could be a general requirement that the admissions office has for all applicants. Number two, now, in the case of transcripts, it's possible that because the education system in India is a little different than the education system in the United States, I may ask Dr. Dioris when he comes back on, or Dr. Dioris, if you're there right now, may I just ask this question of you? It's my understanding that within the next few years, the system in India is going to be moving toward the US system, but it hasn't been that way up till now. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So currently because we were ruled by British, so we have the British system. In 2020, national education policy, which has been announced by the government and our parliament has passed the bill. It is under implementation. It is highly influenced by the American style of education, which is a multidisciplinary education. So definitely we are going very, very close to talking about more about career than the course.
All right. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you so much. So having said that, you may have to have your transcript evaluated by an outside organization to make sure that it is being looked at fairly and equitably as compared with a U.S. transcript. The admissions office wants to be sure there's equity across that. So there's an organization you may hear about called WES, World Education Services. They do a phenomenal job of we had a transcript evaluation from them all the time. They're an excellent organization, and that's probably the one you might use. But if you are asked to do this, once again, it would only serve to help you if you do. It's to make sure that your grades, if you will, are being understood as if you were applying in the United States, that there's an equal balance of evaluation in that area. Another point that is different, you will most likely not be able to secure as much financial aid as U.S. citizens do, especially when it comes to loans. Many of the loan programs in the U.S. are established only for U.S. citizens. But scholarships, grants, stipends, fellowships, those are open to all students who get admitted. If you are admitted to an institution, you will automatically be considered for whatever scholarship money they have. That they don't discriminate there at all in terms of the award. But loan dollars, there aren't as many. Some institutions do offer a loan program for international students with this requirement. You must have a cosigner on that loan who is a United States citizen or permanent resident. Some institutions offer this, not all. You may find that to be the case at the institution to which you ultimately enroll. If so, and that works for you, then you would be available, or you would have more loan dollars available for you. But initially, there's not as many loan dollars. And lastly here, as I briefly mentioned earlier, if you get admitted to the United States for your undergraduate study, they end up issuing you something called an I-20 form that is proof you are allowed to come to their institution. But before they can do that, you must secure your visa in India. So that will be a little different again from a U.S. citizen. This is not something you may already be very familiar with, and that's why my earlier point about applying earlier rather than later is really important, because this gives you time, once admitted, to make sure you have all your paperwork in order. Now, something else, you're going to most likely need to demonstrate to the institution where you're attending that you can afford to pay for your first year of undergraduate training. They will require that before they will issue that I-20 and let you come. So there are some steps here that you need to follow. And should you be admitted, those steps will be made very clear to you by the admitting institution. What they need you to do, what they want you to do, what you have to do before you can get all the paperwork in order. So that is a little different. Okay, now I am going to ask Ms. Debbie to come back. Here she is. And in just a second, I am going to turn the microphone over. As I mentioned, Ms. Debbie is going to share with us briefly what are 4 common mistakes that prospective students make. And again, this isn't just you folks watching. This is a broad spectrum of the applicant pool that make these mistakes. That's why we want to share them with you. So Debbie, with that, I'm going to turn now the microphone over to you and let you take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Don. Well, let's continue with our presentation. So let's talk about some of the common mistakes that an international student might make when trying to do their applications for the U.S. The first would be focusing only on prestigious schools and not learning about other institutions that may serve their needs better. As Dr. Don already mentioned, rankings are very important, but they are not everything. And the higher an institution is ranked, the less amount of applicants they can take. And in some cases, like we heard also before, they take less than 10% or even 5% for their acceptance percentages. So you need to look a little broader than just rankings. And as Dr. Don also said, there is almost now 4,000 accredited colleges and universities here in the United States. So many programs to choose from with wonderful opportunities for study. We encourage our students to focus on the area of study or area of interest they'd like to pursue. Perhaps you wish to be a biology major and have a finance minor. Or perhaps you would like to study engineering and have a co-op experience, so you get real-world work experience while going to school. You may be surprised when you do your research that an institution that is ranked number one with your program may be a school that you never even considered. The second mistake that many international students can make is not paying equal attention to their academics, into their extracurricular activities, and I would add volunteer work, and also then their essays when they go through high school and then complete the application process. Academics are very, very important, and we know that. They are at the top of the tier. Your high school grades, which show your progression over time, and your SAT and ACT scores, which although many schools are not requiring these, they are still very important for scholarships and also for financial aid. So it is important to study and take those tests. And then, of course, the AP exam scores, which we're familiar with, these all play into a part with looking at your academics. But there's another big piece of the puzzle. The admission committees here are looking for well-rounded students, and they're taking what we call today a holistic approach, where they put your academics, your extracurricular activities, volunteer work, test scores, everything on the same playing field and evaluate those. And the beauty of being involved in things and being a well-rounded student is when then you go to write your essays, you have information to share with the admissions committee. You can tie in your academics with what it is you do outside of school. We encourage our students to get involved in school. Perhaps you can participate in Science Olympiad, or perhaps Interact Club or Rotary Club. And moving outside of school, we know many students participate in environmental efforts such as tree plantation, or perhaps volunteering at a hospital or a nursing home if you'd like to study medicine. There's so many ways to get involved. So think of something that you're passionate about. You'll have a much more well-rounded high school experience, and then you'll be able to take that as you go into and work on your college applications. The third mistake that students can make when they come from another country is failing to tell their story completely so that all the parts of the application come together. Being an international student is special and it's unique. And admissions committees want to know, why do you want to come from your country over to the United States, experience a new culture? They want to know, what do you hope to gain from this experience? And what do you hope to bring to their program? And finally, a mistake that is not only made by international students, but one that our students also make here, is not demonstrating authenticity, trying to come off as someone that they are not. It is very tempting when you're going through the application process to think that you have to say a certain thing or write a certain thing in your essay or take part in activities because it will look good on your application. We encourage you to be yourself. Admissions committees are looking for diversity. They don't want 20, 30, 40 students with all the same academics and all the same activities. They want students who will come and participate in their program and then leave the program better than it was when they came. So get involved in things that interest you. You are special and you bring something unique to the program of study where you wish to go. So let your personality shine through. And Dr. Don and I like to share a quote with our students, and I'm going to leave you with that this evening. It's from poet Oscar Wilde, and he said, "Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken." Thank you so much for your attention. And Dr. Don, I'll turn it back over to you.
Ms. Debbie, thank you so very much. You did a great job. And yes, that quote sums it up. Be yourself. Everyone else truly is taken. That is so, it may seem very minor to you, but we all don't tend to warm up to people we think are being fake. We tend to like people that are just themselves. So that's a great tip from Ms. Debbie, and as well as the quote. Thank you so much. Okay, now, in closing, we're going to wrap up what we've been covering. It looks like we already have some questions actually in the Q&A box. Please keep them coming. We're going to be winding down here. We deliberately make these presentations about 35 to 40 minutes so we can answer any questions you have. So again, no bad questions, no dumb questions. They're all important. If they're important to you, we'll try to answer them. So in closing, don't forget, do your research. Please take the time to broaden your focus on several institutions, 15, 20. I had one applicant. This was not in my work with Astute, but in my work with some other students I coach, who looked at 40 institutions before they narrowed it down. I think they applied to 10, but they started out with 40, not 3. Please do your research. Remember, make sure you are planning ahead. Make sure you do not wait until the last minute to start scrambling to get your essays, recommendation letters, transcripts, test scores, all the non-essential information, name, address, all of this. Do not wait till the last minute. You'll make mistakes just because you're rushing. But the admissions committee doesn't know that they're going to see mistakes. And when you're admitting, like University of Pennsylvania, only 6% of your applicant pool, mistakes can cost you dearly. So know your timelines and deadlines. Get your recommenders confirmed ahead of time. Make sure you have, by the end of the summer, after your 11th standard, when you're starting in your 12th standard, you should have some idea now of who it is that is going to recommend you. You want to get that going. Again, keep them informed if need be. If they have questions, be sure to answer the questions. They may want to meet with you. This doesn't happen all that often, but sometimes the recommender wants to meet with the student. They may ask you for your resume, for your transcript. So make sure you are ready to give them what information they need. This is wonderful. I see more questions coming in. Excellent. Okay, number 4, open your common application accounts as early as you can. This doesn't mean you have to fill them all in immediately, but ideally, if you can have your common application general information, name, address, all of this, I call it it is essential, but they're not going to read your name and address when they're evaluating your application, but it needs to be there. So try to at least get that stuff out of the way. If you can upload your transcript early, do it. The more you can do early on, that leaves more time for probably one of the more long-lasting, time-consuming elements of the application, which is doing your essays. So do that. Get those online application accounts opened up and do that. As I mentioned, spend some time making sure your resume is ready to go. If they ask you for one, Ms. Debbie and I, and more importantly, the Astute team, Dr. Dioris and his team, are experts. Some of the best, if not the best. I mean this. Dr. Dioris never asks me to say this, but I have been in higher ed for 43 years. I've traveled all over the world. The Astute Academy is one of the best worldwide in what they do. Clearly, the best. They can help you with resumes. And where needed, Ms. Debbie and I can come in. We can help with essays. But again, we need you to spend some time on them, because who is writing those essays? You are. You're going to write them. We're going to help you to polish them, shall we say. We're going to help you to make them the best they can possibly be. And we believe we've been successful in light of our very first group of students we worked with this past year. All of them got admitted. Every one of them did. So it took some time. Next, this may be easier said than done, but you want to try to enjoy this process a little bit, especially if you plan things out. One of the things Ms. Debbie and I have discovered over this last year is just how busy you are, whether it's 9th, 10th, 11th, or 12th standard. You are really busy. You've got a lot going on, and it's mostly all good things that you're doing. So with that in mind, that can put a little bit of pressure on you. And now you're adding the undergraduate application process to an already large list of responsibilities and things on your plate. But we want to if you start early enough, that process will be spread out over a longer period of time. It won't be so stressful if you're doing it at the last minute. And you're going to learn some things about yourself as you go through this. As you write your essays, even, you're going to be asked some questions that you may never have been asked before. And it's a process for self-learning and self-growth. And we hope you'll be able to enjoy some of it. Now, what about working with Ms. Debbie and myself? Well, as I mentioned, we've been in close association with Astute now for over 10 years, a phenomenal collaboration. Absolutely. It's been so successful at the graduate level, and now at the undergraduate level, we're experiencing that same level of success. As I mentioned, very high acceptance rate. I know that's important. If you're going to invest in having an outside group help you, and you're going to pay that money and so forth, I would think you'd want to be sure that there is some, at the end of that process, there's some encouraging news. Well, I'm happy to tell you that working with us, there has been encouraging news every time. We can start working with you as early as in the 9th standard. And Ms. Deborah and I did have a student we're working with. We have a few in the 10th standard. We have several in 11th. And now, of course, some of those we were working with in these standards have moved up one. But we can work with you across that process. And Ms. Debbie, I'm going to ask you to join me now on camera since I'm talking about you and we're talking about what we do together. I think it's nice for our audience to see you once again. So yes, we can mentor as early as the 9th grade. We are able, as guided by Dr. Dioris and his very, very renowned expert team, we can assist with whatever it is we would be asked to assist with. And we've done all of these things. We have helped with all of these over the years. We can help you wherever you would like. But again, don't forget that the Astute team are your point folks. They're the ones you would work with initially, of course. We come alongside of them and work with them and you as needed. But you would be in very good hands for all of these things. Now, before we get to Q&A, I think I mentioned at the very beginning, Ms. Debbie and I are going to be giving 4 more webinars together this year. Here are the dates of those webinars and the subjects we're going to cover. And as you can see, next time in August, we're going to talk a little bit more about undergraduate education, specifically in the U.S. This won't be as much about the application process now as once you're there, what will that look like? We're also going to talk about your application checklist in September. What do you need to be following? What do you need to be doing so that you're ready to apply and you spread things out enough, as I mentioned earlier? Then we're going to specifically cover absolute aspects, every aspect of the application process. We will cover, Ms. Debbie and I, in October and November, so that by the time you are submitting applications, you will be fully prepared. You will have the best information you can between what we're offering and all of the guidance and tremendous assistance you'll be receiving from Dr. Dioris and his team. So we hope to see you. And then, as I mentioned, in December, perhaps I will be visiting India in person. As that becomes absolutely finalized, we have some dates. I'll add that to our upcoming webinar presentations so that you know when that's happening, so that we can keep you apprised of that. Okay? This has been a wonderful opportunity to spend, here it is. I'm coming to India. I already said it, so I'm going to just skip here to this very important slide. And that is, we've spent now about 45 minutes together sharing with you, Ms. Debbie and I, some very important aspects about the application process for you in the U.S. I see that Dr. Dioris is now back. And it looks like, Dr. Dioris, we do have some questions, 14 or 15 I see in the box. That's wonderful. So I will turn the mic over to you, but not before I say, Dr. Dioris, thank you every year that you give us this true, I mean this, it is such a pleasure working with you and your team. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. And now Debbie and I will be ready to try and take some questions.
Thank you very much. Excellent session as usual, because it is coming with so many years, almost like 43 years of experience in working with the American education system, working with so many large pool of diverse students from different countries. And in fact, the Indian students are fortunate enough to get really help from such a celebrity academician, I'll say. Now come to our question and answers session. I'm really see good amount of questions which is there. So
excellent.
I will ask one by one questions, and then so the first question which is there, what is the academic calendar for universities in United States?
That's a good question. Now, generally, there is not one standard calendar that applies to all institutions. There are two types of terms during the year. Many institutions have what's called a semester system, a fall term and a spring term. Fall term usually goes from August, through early December, and then January through May, something like that. The other option is called the quarter system. There are three, or the trimester. There are three terms. There's a fall term, a winter term, and a spring term. Whichever option this institution offers, typically the academic year is about 36 weeks, 18 weeks before the December holidays, about 18 weeks afterward, give or take. And usually by the end of September, most all institutions in the United States are underway with their new academic year. But some students go as early as orientation. There's usually a new student orientation. Some will go as early as mid-August. Some go later August. But by the end of September, you are certainly up and running at whatever institution you would be attending. Good question.
Yeah, thank you. Second question, how can I find out which universities are rated best for a specific academic major? Which are the best universities for my specific academic major?
Very good question. I'm going to take a crack at this. And Ms. Debbie, if I miss anything, I will ask you. If you don't have anything to add, that's fine, but I will ask you that when I finish. There is information on the internet that you want to be careful about, but there is some information there about not just a ranking of institutions, but a ranking of programs, undergraduate programs. What you want to do is to go on to your internet browser, and you can type in best undergraduate programs in computer science in the United States. That's or best undergraduate programs in pre-med or biology or psychology or history, mathematics, whatever it may be. Type that into your internet browser. What you will likely end up with after the paid advertisements that usually come at the top of those pages is you will end up with several links to some information about good programs in those fields. Now, here's another way to do this. You could, instead of saying best programs, because truly a ranking is in the mind of the person who's doing the ranking. They don't have all the right answers. So you could also say undergraduate programs in biology in the United States. You will get a plethora and most of the subject areas so far anyway, that we have found that our undergraduate students are thinking about, there are outstanding programs, many of them in the United States offering these programs. And lastly, if you were to find a couple of programs that you haven't heard about before, but for some reason they look interesting to you, you could, if you were working with Astute, you could always ask Dr. Dioris and his team about some of those schools, and maybe they might contact us. We can help you with that. But that's how you can get some information more on specific programs. Another good question.
How hard is to get accepted into the Ivy League?
Debbie, do you want to take a first stab at that question? I think we know the answer.
Yes, it is difficult, but not impossible. And obviously, you should try to get into the best institution that you can. And as Dr. Don said, that is why it's helpful to work with an organization like Astute, where they can help you with your applications and just making sure that you're putting the best application together. But again, you need to be yourself. And at some point, then you will be matched with the school or institution that's right for you.
Absolutely well said. I'll just add one thing. When we say that an institution like the University of Pennsylvania, one of the Ivy Leagues, and I would assume the other Ivy Leagues, Columbia, Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth, Cornell, I probably missed one, but at any rate, Princeton, these institutions all probably have acceptance percentages below 10%, as what Debbie found with the University of Pennsylvania. What that means is that they will only take a very small number. If they get, let's say they get 10,000 applications, which some of them do, they would take maybe 600 students out of that group. That if you don't get in, that does not mean you were not qualified. In my experience working at Columbia and at the University of Chicago, most of the applicants we heard from were qualified, but we just could not admit everyone. We were given, that's what we'll be talking about a bit in our next webinar. How does the Dean of Admissions actually handle all of this? How do they make, well, for one thing, we are given a number. For 28 years, every fall, I was told, Don, this is the number of students we want you to bring in this time next year. This is your goal. Let's say that number was 500 at the University of Chicago. I had 5,000 applications sometimes. That means I could admit 1 out of 10. And 95% of those applicants were good. It's a very difficult process. And there's not one particular scenario I can give you. It's a very individualized, unique approach. Good questions. Thanks, Debbie.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Another question is how to transfer from one university to another university. What things to consider while taking transfer?
Good. I'm going to stop saying good questions. I know all of them will be good, so we'll just move right into this response. The main reason to transfer, in my opinion, is you have discovered once you've gotten on that campus that this may not be what you thought it was going to be. This may not be, whether it's the program, the faculty, the students, the campus, the general geographic region, you're not happy there. It is not, and this happens, by the way, to thousands of students. You would not be alone. It's not like you did anything wrong. This does happen. So institutions are very well aware that not every student that starts on their campus is going to graduate on their campus. That's not a black mark on you. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It simply means that based on all the information you had at the time, this was your choice. But now you believe you would like to try another campus that you've also thought about, or some of your friends have told you about that maybe they're going there, and there's a few things that you have appreciated hearing, or you've done your own research on that institution and you've decided to transfer. There is one other reason that some students transfer. I'm not saying it's bad, but they transfer because they want to try to get into a higher ranked institution once they've done well in their freshman year at another institution. All I would say to that is don't make the decision to transfer just because of the ranking. You could be sadly disappointed again. You need to be sure that there are other things about that institution that appeal to you, not just the rank.
Yeah, that is very, very important because that is one of the parameters, not the sole criteria for deciding the universities.
Yep.
Yeah. What is the difference between the community college and the normal college? Are international students accepted? Should one opt it instead of regular university programs?
Yes, community colleges tend to be 2-year institutions as opposed to 4-year institutions. And they generally appeal to a much wider audience of students, quite a few of whom never went to college right after they graduated from high school. They went into a career and they now would like to come back and earn some education. There are also students, however, who go to community college right out of the 12th standard, let's say. And yes, you can apply to some community colleges accept international students. Most of them do, actually. So you can apply, and what that does is some students believe that that would enable them to become a little more acclimated with life in a new country, expose them to, usually these campuses are larger. There's a larger number of students, some as many as 30,000. The College of DuPage near Chicago, where I live, and the William Rainey Harper College, thousands of students of all ages. It's a wonderful mix of cultures, of ages, of backgrounds. It's a wonderful opportunity. And then after that, in the second year of the community college, you would then apply to transfer into a 4-year institution to further your education and complete your degree program. Very, very acceptable option. And if there are questions about this afterward, and Dr. Dioris would want to have me, if you want to communicate with me or communicate with Dr. Dioris and his team, I can provide more information later. But a very viable option.
What is the minimum age for international student to come to United States?
Well, I don't know if I would answer the question quite with a minimum age. I think it would be more, what is the minimum educational requirement in order to come? If you're coming for college, you must have earned a diploma or a high school certificate, whatever it might be. Dr. Dioris, I'm sorry, I don't remember this. Is it, do you, at the end of the 12th standard, does a student receive what's called a diploma from their school?
No, it is a 12th standard higher secondary certificate. Higher secondary school certificate. So
secondary, okay. Thank you. So, in other words, if you're going to be considered for an undergraduate degree in the United States, you're coming from India, you have to demonstrate that secondary certificate, that you earned that. If you're going to go for a master's degree, you must demonstrate that you successfully completed a bachelor's degree. So whatever the age is not as much reviewed as what is the degree or what is the certification you have that would qualify you for that next level of your education.
There is another question from Sudha Fadke. Does learning a foreign language help in applying for colleges?
Yes and no. I know that's a nebulous answer, but let me try to explain. It never hurts. For instance, applicants from India, all of them that I've ever met are bilingual, are fluent in their mother tongue and in English. They speak. It's amazing to me. It's wonderful. So the fact that that is part of your background, what you're bringing to the table, will certainly not be hurtful in any way. If you are familiar with a third language, there is a level of an impression that does make on an admissions committee. I had some applicants who spoke 5 languages fluently. That just amazed me every time. It wasn't often, but it happened. It was just wonderful. They spoke so many languages. So, yes, if you are fluent, or even if you're proficient, you may not be fluent, but if you have, I would call myself moderately proficient in Spanish. I can get by if I'm in a Spanish-speaking country. I wouldn't say I'm fluent, but if you're fluent or proficient in more than one language, yes, that will not hurt you, but it's not an automatic guarantee of admission either.
Can we take a recommendation letter from someone outside of school, but known to us?
That's yes and no. Again, yes, if you are allowed more than one recommendation, then the chances that you could go outside of school would increase. But if they only want one letter, you really need to have that letter completed. If you're in the, you're in the 12th standard or you're finishing the 11th standard, you need to have that recommender either be one of your teachers or your guidance counselor. And I'm going to ask Debbie to confirm this in a minute because she's worked with some students very recently in her own neighborhood who have gone through this process. But I believe if it's one letter, it does need to be from the school. If you have more options, then you could go outside. Ms. Debbie, did I get that right?
Yes, most likely it would be one letter of reference from someone in the school, and then the guidance counselor usually provides the second. And that's been the experience so far. And with some scholarship programs, you can go outside then of the school in your field of interest or any extracurricular activities you're part of. So.
Debbie, thank you, because I'm going to now clarify what I just said.
Yeah.
If you have two letters of recommendation required, they would both be in the school. One is the teacher, one is... Now, I don't know if schools in India have a similar guidance counselor system that we have in the US. So if they don't, then at least one letter should be from a teacher in your school who knows you and can really provide a good recommendation. If you don't have a guidance counseling program, that's okay. That's nothing to be worried about. Then you could go outside the school as long as whoever you ask knows you in two ways, long enough and well enough to really write a good letter for you.
Yeah. That is very critical because the person should know you. It is just not you just know somebody and he just writes, he doesn't know you and he is not really spend the time with you.
You know, I'm so glad you said that, Dr. Diors. We got a letter of recommendation one year when I was at the University of Chicago from a gentleman who was at that time vice president of the United States. And that was a pretty big deal. We don't see many letters like that coming across your desk every day. That applicant was denied. They were not admitted. It was very clear that the vice president did not know. I think they knew his parents, but they didn't know him at all. It was a 2-sentence letter. I recommend this person. He's a wonderful person. That was it. And that person did not get in. So yes, be very careful who you choose.
Do I need to show the certificates or proof for the voluntary activities? Do I need to prove it or do I have to submit it?
No, you don't have to have a signed statement of any kind. We will trust you. And, you know, if obviously, if you're working with us at Astute, you will be asked to verify that these things you're doing are true. There will be ways of monitoring to make sure that you are doing these things, obviously. But the way you certify that, so to speak, will be on your application and on your resume, where you will actually indicate, here are my volunteer or community service activities. Most likely, even in the common application or in some supplemental questions that could come from certain institutions, you may be asked to talk about that. That's the way you would show that to them.
Another question, what is the good SAT score for scholarships?
Debbie, I'm going to rely on your expertise to just answer this one part of this before I say what I want to say. The highest score on the SAT now is it 1600?
1600, yeah.
That's what I thought. All right. So
for
1300
plus should be decent to get.
There you go. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. 1300 plus.
1300, right.
Is that Debbie? Yeah. So
At
Debbie,
least 1300 and
Debbie and Dr. Dioris, excuse me, are a little bit more versed on the actual scores of the SAT right now than I may be. So what I think both of them are agreeing on, 1,300 or higher would put you in contention for scholarships. Good question. Thank you.
Another question from the Shrikant Pandit Rao. What criteria generally should be applied for selecting the recommenders, and how many recommenders are needed? So partially you answered this, but
yeah. Well, very quickly, that's okay. We'll take as many questions as we can here. The number of recommenders is going to be told to you by each institution. They tell you how many recommendation letters they want. So you'll need to follow their instruction. In terms of how to choose someone, clearly, as I mentioned earlier, this person needs to know you, have interacted with you, not just once a month down at the local pub where you have a cup of coffee together, but they've worked with you, they've taught you, they've managed you in a volunteer capacity or in another job that you may have. They've observed you over time very closely. They know, it can't be a family member or a best friend. That's off limits. But a professional individual in your life who knows you both long enough and well enough, because they're the only ones who can really answer the questions that are asked on the recommendation letter. And I'm going to tell you, in the 28 years Dr. Dioris mentioned at the beginning, I evaluated over 125,000 applications during my 28 years in higher ed full time. Of that number, if you multiply that 125,000 by 2 or 3, most of the applicants I reviewed had to submit 2 or 3 letters of recommendation along with their application. That number, I evaluated well over 500,000 letters of recommendation. Do you know how many of them were helpful to me? About 5%. The rest were meaningless. If you have, and Ms. Debbie and I will be talking about this when we get to the section about each segment of the application. This is critical. If you have outstanding recommenders, it's not a guarantee you'll be admitted, but you're going to go up in visibility because so many of them are not good. So again, long enough, a professional individual, a teacher, an employer, a supervisor, someone like that who knows you long enough and well enough to write the letter.
Yeah, normally in common application, you should be ready with 1 counselor and 3 teachers or 3 letter of recommendation. That is the maximum which is required. But some university may require 1, some university may require 2.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, how to get university list suitable for me? How to shortlist the universities?
Dr. Dioris, would you like to share a little about that? Because you and I work together on this. I'll let Dr. Dioris share with you how we do this.
So basically, the university list, as Dr. Donald Martin says, it is not the ranking part which is the sole criteria for deciding the things. It is the overall academic, non-academic performance, even what activities you have done, what is your career objective which is there, what career you want to make it, your skills, ability. All together we evaluate. Initially, Dr. Donald Martin will provide me maybe around 40 or 50, sometimes 50 universities are shortlisted at a higher level. Then we start working on to those 50 universities and we can guide you. We share that list with you. And then as the parameters we tell what type of campus sizes, the basically faculty to student ratio. Cost is one of the very, very critical. Many parents wants the scholarships to be given. So some universities may provide higher scholarships than some universities may not. University of Berkeley is a great university, but international student, they hardly provide any scholarships. So even though that university is great, but if it is not affordable to you, definitely we have to look many factors. So it's a constant interaction with you. And then finally 8, 10 or 12 universities which is selected, we create a basket. Some universities matching your profile, some universities slightly higher, and then some fail safe. And then we make it so that we get a decent level of admissions. And then we further filter and then accept one of the university. We always get 5 or 6 admissions letters from the undergraduate student. Minimum is that. In fact, we are getting some are 10 or 12 admits also to a single student part of it.
This is one of the most enjoyable aspects of our work with Astute is we are able to do some research. Ms. Debbie and I, we will create a short list, and then we pass that along to Dr. Dioris and his expert team. And as he just said, they will then work with you. But that's one of the beauties of working with Astute. You get a much larger list of institutions that are potentially very, very helpful to you. So, Dr. Dioris, I feel so badly. Ms. Debbie and I probably have about 10 more minutes before we have to get ready for another meeting. So we'll go ahead and answer as many of these as we can.
Because there are questions are coming, more than 19 questions are there. But I know which is the questions we have already answered. I will not take those questions.
Well, we'll do the best we can here.
Sure. The Shrikant Pandit Rao is again, and what is the ideal timeline for appearing of SAT?
Our suggestion is earlier than later. Again, if you can take the SAT perhaps during the months of, say, April, May, or June, before you start your 12th standard, or just when you're getting into the 12th standard. If you don't do as well as you want, that gives you enough time to study and retake it. So in other words, don't wait, earlier than later, based on all of the activities you're involved in and what's on your schedule.
Vidyan and Patel has asked the common application. So it's a centralized portal where we fill the applications completely, so that we don't need to duplicate it to the, if I'm applying to 10 universities, I'm not filling 10 separate forms. So common things can be included. That is why it is called the common application. Okay, some of the questions which is repetitive.
Okay.
How can I avoid missing out on applications while appearing or waiting for exam results? So if I'm appearing for the exam result, how do I really missing out on applications part?
To be honest with you, for that question, I truly believe Dr. Dioris and his team, Ms. Rajashri, Ms. Ruhi, two of our just beloved colleagues we work with on the program, would be, I would suggest that you, whoever, that's a very good question. My suggestion is that you reach out directly to them, and they can let you know how that would best work. Again, this is a scheduling question, and it's a good one. You have a lot on your plate. You've got a lot of things going, so that's a very good question. But I would like to defer to the Astute team for that.
Yeah, you need to plan the activities. See, you cannot be saying everything cannot come in the examination. You need to plan 1 year, 2 years in advance, and you have to, your deadlines, and you finish off the specific activities in a timeline. You will never face this problem. But otherwise, if you come in the last moment and everything is scrambled, it will be definitely a firefighting activity. What is the rolling admissions, and when should we start the applications?
Very quickly, rolling admissions means that from the moment there's a start date, let's say October 1st, until an end date of April 30th, you can submit an application anytime you want in between those dates. There's no other institutions have strict deadlines. We have you can submit an application on November 1st. If you don't do it by then, you have to wait till February 1st. And if you don't do it by then, you have to wait till March the 1st. Those would be deadlines. Rolling admissions, the only deadline is the last date that you can submit. You can submit any time in between those dates. So as I mentioned earlier, don't wait till the end. The later you wait, the more chances that the seats in the class will have filled up, and then there won't be room for you. So you don't have to apply on the first day, but my suggestion, if it's October 1st through April 30th, apply before the end of that calendar year. Be sure to apply before December, or before the end of December.
So another question, what is the public versus the private universities? Which universities are better?
That is a bit confusing, I would think, for folks that are not generally familiar with that designation. The truth is there are some phenomenal public universities in this country that are ranked. The University of Michigan is one of the top universities in the world is a public institution in this country. There, and of course, I'm not going to name names in this group, but there are private universities that aren't very good, in my opinion, or in a particular subject area. And that's why the person who asked earlier, how do I get information about programs? Just because I'm just going to pick this out of a hat. I have no knowledge of any specific here, but just because the biology department you're interested in is at Princeton doesn't necessarily mean that that biology program is as good as the University of Michigan, which Princeton is private, University of Michigan is public. So you need to be very, very careful about it is not public or private, either one is a completely viable option for you. There truly is.
Yeah. Last two questions. We have 3 minutes left.
Okay.
Do universities consider SAT score breakdown during the application or just the total score between the mathematics and English section?
Very good question. My experience is that the more competitive the institution, the more prestigious the institution, the more they will consider both elements of the score. The less competitive may go more for the overall score. That's a very short question. If we had more time, I'd explain more, but generally speaking, that's my experience.
Yeah. Last question. There are many subjects and many options at undergraduate level where the students are confused how to choose the major and minor. Which major to take and minor?
This is a very good closing question, and this is not an easy thing. Some students are so certain when they start their undergrad education, even if they're going to have to study some liberal arts courses in the first 2 years, or gen ed courses, as they call them. But they're pretty sure where they want to go. I have a great niece who is starting her undergraduate this fall. She already pretty much has determined what she's going to study. That's set, it's done, she knows. I had another great niece earlier on who wasn't as certain what she was going to do. It very much depends on the person. The good news is most institutions do not require you to declare a major or minor until at the end of your second year. So this gives you some time to, if you're not certain, don't panic, don't worry. In fact, and some folks go in with this idea, I'm going to take biology, I'm studying psychology, I'm studying computer science. They get there, and at the end of the first year, they've already changed their mind, and they're going to do something else. So the good news is you don't have to know that for sure. If you're asked in an essay question, what do you want to major in? My suggestion is you always say, well, as of now, this is where I'm leaning. This is what I'm thinking about. But that way you leave the door open in case something else comes along and you're more interested.
Yeah, definitely, because it's a very complex thing to choose a career, and we work on the mentoring part of it with the students. We need to understand the students, and
yes.
In fact, many universities, premier universities, has the option undecided. You are not deciding the major while you are entering into the university system. So thank you very much, Dr. Donald Martin and Ms. Debbie. Really excellent session. I hope the students would have enjoyed, and they got the first-hand information with a person with such a great exposure. Definitely those questions which we could not answer, I will try to answer those questions to you. Maybe I will write to you or I'll speak with you. We can fix up the call. So really grateful for sparing this wonderful session. Thank you all the students, the parents, and even some school teachers if they joined. Really appreciate asking so many questions to you. And thank you very much. And good night to all. And from Donald Martin, have a good day. And Debbie.
Thank you so much.
Right. Have a great
Bye. Bye.